The title of my message today is Prove It. Prove It. We're working our way through the book of James, and it's a very practical book, and we've spent the last few weeks working through chapter 1 and the first half of chapter 2, and then today we're going to wrap up chapter 2, and it's a challenging book of the Bible because James breaks down our faith, and he makes it very actionable and very intentional for us. It's so practical. He literally tells you what you should and should not be doing. And how many of you know we need that sometimes? Just a very clear yes or no, do this thing, don't do this thing, right? Especially if you're working with kids, you got to be like, please do this thing. Not that thing, this thing. And that's what it's kind of like when we're reading the book of James, okay? So the title of the message is Prove It. And that came to mind because as I was reading this passage, as we're going to read in just a minute, it reminded me of a few different things, all right? When I was a kid, I used to play a lot of pickup basketball, and we would play a game called Pig or Horse. Anybody know what I'm talking about? And the game is really simple. You had 2 or more players, and one person would try to make a shot, and then if they made the basket, the next person had to recreate the same shot from the same spot. And as you play, you'd get a letter if you missed, right? If you missed, you'd get a P, and then you get an I, and if you got to the letter G in Pig, you would be out, or Horse, you'd get to the E, and you'd be out. But as I was growing up, we started adding this thing in called Prove It. So if you were eliminated, the original shooter had to come back and make the exact same shot to prove that they could make it again. And so it brought to mind some good memories, but it also brought to mind our everyday life. Because how many of you have met people who say they can do amazing things, but you've never actually seen them do it before? Yeah, that got a lot of people nodding, yep. Maybe it's not even amazing things, but they just say they can do something and you're not really sure, but they've never actually done it for you before. In your mind, you're like, well, prove it, right? You're saying prove it. And they can't really back it up. And this is kind of the impetus of school, right? Is I am teaching you these things, now you need to prove it back to me that you've learned these things, right? Sorry, kids, we're going to start talking about school a little bit. But math and science is based a lot on proving it, right? When I took geometry in high school, it was literally proof after proof after proof, and I hated geometry, right? I hated having to memorize all those theorems and postulates and all those different things. I'm like, well, that angle is the same because it's the same. I don't need to prove why it is. But my teacher would be like, nope, you got to go through. There's 7 steps to this one. You got to name out all the theorems and postulates and all the different things to get you from point A to point B. And I'm like, but I know the answer. She'd say, well, prove it. Science is based upon a methodology of proving it called the scientific method. How many of you are familiar with the scientific method? How many of you remember that was a long time ago and you may be vaguely remembering what the scientific method is? All right, well, I have a chart for you, okay? All right, so the scientific method is very simple, really, but it's a tried and true method of proving something to be true. It starts with an observation. I have observed something, and that leads me to a question. So I'm going to ask a question. Then I'm going to research what I can find out about that topic or that thing or that item. And that's going to give me an idea, a hypothesis, right? A guess. This is what I think will happen. Then I'm going to lay out a carefully controlled experiment, and I'm going to run it at least once. But in science, you got to run it lots and lots of times, right? Then I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at the results. I'm going to analyze them, and I'll develop a conclusion. And either my idea was right, and I'm going to do it again to make sure it's still right, or it was wrong, and I got to change something up, right? Science works through this principle, and it's the same every time. This is what real science comes back to every time. I've seen something, I have a question about it, I'm going to research it, I'm going to test it. Are my results consistent with what I thought it would be? Nope, then I need to adjust my thoughts about it, right? And that's how we've gone through and we've proven a lot of different things. And some things are still in the theoretical stage, right? There are different things like that. But what if instead of a science or a math problem, we applied this to our lives, this scientific method? All right, let me lay out a scenario for you, all right? For example, what if somebody were looking at me and asking the question, is Pastor Zach a real Christian? Does he really follow Christ? Okay, so this person starts to research what it means to be a Christian. They look up different resources, they read the Bible, they figure out what a Christian should look like, and they're going to lay out a hypothesis that says Pastor Zach is a real Christian. That's what they think is the truth. The experiment begins. And in this case, we can't lay out certain parameters, but they would observe and watch me, Pastor Zach, deal with different everyday situations. See how I interact with people, how I adjust, how I treat people, how I respond to different situations, and make some observations based on there. And then they're going to come back and analyze the facts there. Well, okay, Pastor Zach, I noticed one day he was getting yelled at, and man, he just ripped into that person and just started screaming back at him, right? Ooh, he was dishonest with money, which I'm not, by the way. This is hypothetical. I promise I'm very careful with money, all right? But if they come to those observations, then what is the conclusion in the report going to bring? My hypothesis was wrong. Pastor Zach is not a true Christian. And that's humbling when you stop and think about it. What if I put your name in this scenario? You know, are you a real Christian? Well, how do we know? Well, we have a process. We know what the standard looks like. And this is what the section of James that we're covering today deals with. You can say you have faith, but unless it's provable, faith in action, can we know that you really have faith or not? It gets a little bit heavy in here, right? But let's read, let's discuss, let's see what Scripture says about this, because by the end, I think we'll all learn that we can prove our faith very simply, all right? So James chapter 2, verses 14 through 16, this section is, what good is it? What good is our faith? So let's read. What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say, goodbye, have a good day, stay warm and eat well. But then you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do? Whew, okay. Just right into the thick of it, right? James just jumps right in. And he begins this section with the question and the phrase, dear brothers and sisters. If you've been with us over the last month or so, you've realized he uses this to address a new topic, right? Saying like, hey, I'm switching gears just a little bit. Hey, dear brothers and sisters, I'm talking to all of you. Are you paying attention? Because I'm about to change where I'm going in this direction. And he begins to talk about faith and actions. And in order to have a healthy conversation about this, I need you to understand some things. One of the things that we have to keep in mind when we read James, particularly in sections where he's saying faith and action, faith and works, and all of those things, is James is, we have to pay attention to what he's saying and not saying. All right, here's what I mean by that. James is not saying at any point in his letter that action replaces faith in the salvation experience. We are saved by our faith. I want to make that very clear. So when we start talking about action, I'm not talking about salvation. It's not a debate. James is not setting it up like that. Rather, it's an exploration of faith alone versus faith in action. All right, so can we have that as our baseline? So anytime I'm talking or James is talking about faith in action, we're not discounting the power of faith in our salvation experience. We're actually adding on to that and saying, yes, that's good, but what are you doing with it? All right, is everybody clear? Making sense? We have to establish that because it's very, very easy to be like, well, James is saying I got to have action. No, he's saying you need faith and action. All right, they go hand in hand. It's actually very similar to what he said in chapter 1, that hearing should lead to faith. And then in this section, he's saying faith should lead to action. All right? And in this passage, he's referencing the fellow Jewish believers. And you notice, he says it's somebody you know walks by. You've encountered somebody you know who's fallen on hard times. This isn't a stranger. This is at least an acquaintance. And still, his example says they've walked by and they basically said, thoughts and prayers. All right, so is that really too much different than what we do on social media right now? Something happens and we say, oh, thoughts and prayers. Praying. It's kind of a little bit of a gut check, right? Because it's really easy to type that out. Okay? The thing that we need to pay attention to in this example is that he's addressing people who in the moment can and should do something about it. There are times in our lives when the best we can do is thoughts and prayers, right? I completely understand that, especially if it's distance or it's cultural things or different things like that. Like there are sometimes that literally all we can do is pray, but James is trying to address us and say, hey, there are things you can do. And this really brought to mind one of Jesus' teachings when he was in the temple. In Mark chapter 12, Jesus says this, he's watching this happen in 41 through 44. It says this, Jesus sat down near the collection box in the temple and watched as the crowds dropped in their money. Many rich people put in large amounts. Then a poor widow came and dropped in 2 small coins. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given more than all the others who are making contributions, for they gave a tiny part of their surplus, but she, poor as she is, has given everything she had to live on. Everybody can do something. And remember, James was either Jesus' brother or very closely interacting with Jesus. So I have to imagine he's thinking about this as that poor widow who didn't have anything, who was still doing something. It wasn't just empty words of faith, it was action. So when we say thoughts and prayers, because that's all we can do, we had better be people of integrity and actually have thoughts and prayers for the person we're talking to. All right? So I want you to know, many of you have reached out, we've talked on the phone, or you've texted me and I say, I'm praying for you. I have worked really hard, and I'm still not perfect, but trying to be disciplined that as soon as I get that text or that phone call, I'm praying for you. All right? I'm not perfect, but I do my very best. As soon as I get a text, I pray right then and there. So when I text you back and say, I'm praying for you, I want you to know that I am praying for you right then and there. And the Lord brings you back to mind often throughout the day. It's not just that one moment. But we can all do that, right? We can move beyond just saying it, but we can actually do it. The implication, like I said before, is that James is talking to people who can and should do something, that they have a relationship with Jesus that's taught them that they should take care of the poor and broken down. And this passage is carefully written and not meant to be a read between the lines again, right? I'm establishing it's not faith or action, it's faith and action. It's not a throwdown of which one is better. It is a both. If you have faith, you should be taking action, all right? So he gives us a real example. And I shared an example last week of this at my college, right? The guy came in and pretended to be homeless and how we treated him and everything. And that, to me, just another living example that I've lived to see how it goes, right? But let's move on to the next section. The next section says this, real faith demands action. Real faith demands action. James chapter 2, verses 17 through 20. So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Time out, again, right? Faith is central to our salvation experience. He's not saying faith in God is not enough for salvation. He's saying it's not enough for everyday godly living. All right? We got to have action to go with it. All right? Back in. All right? Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds. You say you have faith, for you believe there is one God? Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without good deeds is useless? Let's look at a couple different translations. In the NIV, it says this, in the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. In the NASB, it says this, in the same way, faith also, if it has no works, is dead by being by itself. Very powerful terminology here. Useless is a strong phrase, but dead is even more, right? Lifeless, without value. James takes a conditional approach here, and he says faith, if it does not have works, tells us that it is not worth anything. We have to pay attention to what's being written here. By itself really brings to mind it's the both and, not the either or. And he just keeps riffing on this a little bit. And then in the example there, he goes on, he says, yes, but, right, I have faith, you have works. And yes, the body of Christ is vast and diverse, and we can have faith, and somebody can be more about works, and somebody can be more about faith, but we can't rest on those laurels. We can't just sit there, because James fights this argument by proving how empty it is. If you have faith, you need to have action to accompany said faith. We can talk all we want about possessing those gifts, but until they are applied and exercised, no one can see your faith. Whew. And that's a challenge. Faith without works is like this. It's like a car battery. When it's working great, your car starts, right? You've got charge to do all the things you need. It is fulfilling its purpose. It's providing power to the car. But a battery that's dead is still a battery, but it has no purpose. It's dead. It doesn't power what it's supposed to. It doesn't accomplish its purpose. That's what faith without action is like. It's like a dead car battery. Are you still saved? Absolutely. But if you have no action, you're dead spiritually. You're not doing what you need to do. And that's where we get phrases like this. Actions speak louder than words. You can say all day, I believe in Christ, but until you prove it, it's hard to believe it. We say things like, put up or shut up. Right? Stop running your mouth. Prove it. We have terms like, you're just giving me lip service. You're just telling me what I want to hear, because there's no action behind it. Ronald Reagan once said, trust but verify. Right? And obviously, he's talking about foreign relations. I'm talking about just everyday life, right? Trust but verify. And then in my commentaries I'm reading, I love this phrase that Stephen Runge had. He said, if intangible concepts like compassion and faith are not put into practice, we have no proof they exist. Okay, because it's intangible. You can't write down on a paper and score somebody's faith just based on that. Until you can see the action behind the faith, you cannot prove that faith exists. Can faith that is never seen really be a saving faith? Okay, that's a deep question. The answer is yes, but no, right? It's kind of one of those gray areas. Yes, you are saved by faith, but are you really living out your God purpose in your life? Does belief in God really matter? Absolutely. Even the demons believe there's a God, but is there faith in God? That's the difference, right? You've probably run into people who are like, yeah, I believe in God, but they don't live like it. They have no relationship with him. They just are saying that they believe in God. Well, good for them. I believe there's gravity. I'm not going to jump off the stage and expect not to fall to the ground, right? But faith in something is very different. And we can boil it down like this. We can have beliefs and values, and they can be actual or preferred. All right, so here's what I mean by this. Actual versus preferred beliefs and values. Preferred beliefs and values are things we say and think are important. That's a preferred value and belief. Things we say and believe. Yes, I value integrity. I value honor. I value all of those things. But actual beliefs are the things we act on. We can say all we want. We can have the greatest vision statement in the world. But until we as a person or as a church body accomplish that vision and mission, it's just words. It's just a belief system. There are no legs to it. Does that make sense? We have to have action behind it. And as Christians, we do say those things. We say we believe in honesty, honor, Bible reading, prayer, fasting, etc. And none of us would say belief in those things is bad. It's not. But how many of us actually apply and do those things in our real life? Okay, that's gut check time, right? This is what James is trying to address in those Jewish believers at the time. People without faith or works are really foolish or senseless. And I am chief of those, by the way. I'm not calling you names that I'm not calling myself, right? Right? If I'm not acting on what I believe, I'm foolish. I'm useless. I have to be the person that God called me to be. It may be possible to have such a faith that isn't seen, but in the end, it's useless. It's like that dead car battery. It's there, but it ain't doing anything. And we have to move beyond that. So then James transitions from this hard conversation to biblical examples that his audience would have known pretty strongly at the time, and actually names we recognize. So we see these biblical examples. The first one is Abraham. the father of the Jewish people, right? In James 2:21-24, it says this, "Don't you remember that our ancestor Abraham was shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. And so it happened just as the scriptures say. Abraham believed in God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. He was even called the friend of God. So you see, we are shown to be right with God by what we do, not by faith alone." Okay, he's writing to a Jewish Christian audience here, right? So they would have known intimately the details of Abraham and his life. But just as a reminder to us today, he's referencing this story we see in Genesis chapter 22 where God appears and he talks to Abraham and he says, "Take your son, your only son, whom you deeply love, go up to the mountain and offer your son Isaac as a sacrifice to me." I still think this is one of the craziest stories in Scripture. And if you remember, Abraham and Sarah were unable to have children, and they were 90 and 100 when they finally were given Isaac. This is the son of the promise. This is his son whom God has promised to give him many nations and descendants outnumbering the sand on the shores and the stars in the sky and all of those things. And God pops up and says, "Go sacrifice him." Literally, go lay him on a bed, murder him, and offer him as a burnt sacrifice to me, just like all the other pagans around you do. And in the story, we know that Abraham was ready to do that. It's so wild to me. I cannot even imagine taking one of my children and saying, "Hey, we're going up the mountain, I'm going to kill you. For God. For God. It's for God, Ellie. It's for God," right? I can't even imagine, but that's exactly what Abraham did. He went up to that mountain, he tied up Isaac, he laid him on that altar, had the knife in the air, prepared to kill his son when God sent an angel and stopped him and said, "You've been tested and found true," right? And God provided a ram in the thicket, and they offered up a sacrifice that wasn't Isaac, right? It's a crazy story. But because of Abraham's deep faith, he was willing to put crazy action behind his faith in the wildest of all circumstances. Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, talks about Abraham quite a bit, but in this section that references specifically the story, it says this: "It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promises, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac, even though God had told him, 'Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted.' Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead," right? Because he didn't actually sacrifice him on that altar, but God provided a way out. What a vivid example. There are a lot of moms and dads and grandpas and grandmas in here. Can you even imagine being so obedient to do that? I don't know that I think God does that anymore. I'm not going to limit God, right? But we're not in the practice of offering sacrifices like that. But man, wow. What a great example. And as we see here, James is really heading back, and he's talking about this bringing his faith to completion, which is an idea he gave us in chapter 1. And I just want to refresh your memory here. James chapter 1, verses 2-4 says this: "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing." And James really, it's like very clearly like referencing back in there this completeness, the perfecting of his faith. He's trying to see how God made Abraham a tested and tried believer in him, and that faith was rich because it was from action. Works is not on faith alone. Emphasis is on alone. It's a caveat. It's an addendum that draws our attention to the fact that faith is the faith that saves us. It's the quality of our faith. It is faith plus action that is superior to unseen faith. James seeks to correct this attitude that this internal, this quiet, this reserved faith is sufficient. He's saying, yeah, it's good for your salvation, but outside of that, what good is it? Because what did Jesus tell us in Matthew? Go and make disciples of all nations, right? Jesus himself gave us action. So Abraham lays out this crazy story, and the next example that James uses is just as crazy. He references a woman named Rahab. Anybody remember the story of Rahab? Got to go all the way back in the Old Testament, just like Abraham, and we find her story in Joshua. When the Israelites are getting ready to conquer the promised land, they come across the city of Jericho, a walled, mighty city, and there are spies that are sent in, and they're exploring, trying to find weaknesses, and Rahab is the one who helps them. So in the book of Joshua, we read this. It says, Rahab, the prostitute, this is James, excuse me. Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely away on a different road. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. Whew. More strong language, but let's talk about Rahab for just a minute. She was a prostitute. She lived in the city walls. She was thought nothing by society, but she was the one who, in faith, rescued these two foreigners, saying that God had given them this land, right? And in return, they promised her that if her and her whole family were in her apartment and dropped a cord out the window, that they would be saved. And her family was saved when those walls came tumbling down, right? They marched around the walls, they blew their trumpets, they yelled, which, by the way, not a super effective way for tearing down a wall by yelling at it and blowing trumpets at it. It's not going to work for us, right? That was the power of God working through the Israelite people there, right? We just got to make that clear. So she was saved. Her and her whole family were saved. She was a prostitute. Yet she's rewarded. And we find out that she's not only just rewarded, but she's celebrated throughout Scripture. She shows up in the Hall of Faith just a little bit after Abraham, Hebrews 11:31. It was by faith that Rahab the prostitute was not destroyed with the people in her city who refused to obey God, for she had given a friendly welcome to the spies, celebrated for her faith. But then also, in a way she could never fully understand or comprehend, Rahab the prostitute ends up in the lineage and family of Jesus. Matthew chapter 1, verse 5, Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, and Obed was the father of Jesse, who is the father of David. Whew, that stuff gives me chills. That is not the person you would expect to show up in this Hall of Fame of faith, right? The Hall of Faith. It's not the person you would expect to show up in the lineage of Jesus, but because she had faith and took action, she is celebrated for those two things put together. This is somebody who probably at the time had never really heard who God is, except that there's these people who say they have the one true God. But in the short interaction, she is celebrated. It is her quality of faith. It is her action with her faith that we celebrate today. And James, as he's wrapping this all up, again, just as a reminder, his goal is not to change our beliefs that faith is what saves us, but to fight against the thought that we can possibly have a thriving faith without doing anything with it. The qualifiers we see of things like faith by itself, faith alone, just remind us that it is the both and. Faith and action. And I know I've repeated myself a lot, but that's because this is so true for all of us in this place. And as I'm preaching this, I'm preaching to myself too. I want you to know that. We can say we have faith, but until we prove it, what kind of faith is it? Bill, if you want to make your way up here. I have one application point. Usually I've given you 3, 4, 5 application points. My one application point for today is this. Prove it. It's the title of the message. Last week it was Keep It Simple, Silly. This week is Prove It. In the words of Nike, just do it, right? If you say you have faith, prove it. This ties right in with integrity, right? That was my first core value that we talked about is integrity. That is the point for today. Prove it. Don't just be a Sunday morning, Wednesday night Christian. Don't be what we call a creaster and just show up on Christmas and Easter. Don't just be a Christian every morning when you're doing your devos at home and then go to the workplace and just tear people up and tear people down. Don't just be a good person. That's part of the equation, but it's not the whole thing. You can 100% be a good person and still miss it, and still miss the point. Last week in Keep It Simple, Silly, we talked about how Jesus boiled it down so well for us. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. And James has continued that thread through here, saying, prove it. Take your faith and don't keep it tightly guarded. Share it with the people around you. And what you'll find is that faith goes further than you ever could. You'll start doing crazy things like talking to people who are less fortunate than you. Maybe going on a missions trip and seeing what the world really looks like outside of the United States. By encountering people who just need something. They just need somebody to love them and care for them. Your presence is enough instead of not giving them the time of day. You know, us older folks, there's a lot of hurting teenagers and kids that just need somebody, a caring adult, to just give them a fist pound or a high five, give them a hug and say, how are you? Tell me about what's going on in your life. We've talked about multi-generational ministry. That's it. That's just showing you care can make a world of difference. Genuine faith is tested and perfected. Actions and words work together to prove our faith. I'm going to go back to James chapter 1 here. Consider it joy when you're tested, when your faith is tested, not just by trial and circumstance, but when you see an opportunity to do something with your faith and have that action step, and you're forced to decide, am I going to step out in faith and take care of that need, or am I going to just kind of keep my faith and sit quietly in the corner? Ooh, that's tough stuff. And no, I know not all of us are called to be a preacher or an evangelist or a missionary. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about simply doing what Jesus asked us to do, to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. Put that faith in God into action to love those around us. That's it. That's the application point for today. That's our what do we do with it this week? That's it.